History calls those men the greatest who have ennobled themselves by working for the common good. Experience acclaims as happy as the man who has made the greatest number of people happy. Karl Marx, 1837. The Communist Manifesto was first published in German in 1848. Written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, it explained the utopia of communism and how it was to come about, and outlined the inevitable end to the constant struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. It was published in Russian in 1882. Vladimir Lenin, born on April 22, 1870, was raised in a loving family that prioritized education and social justice. At the age of 17, Lenin's brother Alexander was arrested and hanged for plotting against the Tsar. To cope, Lenin began to study and immerse himself in the works of Karl Marx and Nikolai Chernyshevsky. By 1893, Lenin embraced Marxist ideals and invested himself in the revolution, which had been building up in Russia since 1825. He began to study Marx's ideas in relation to the country of Russia, struggling with the concept that the proletariat was capable of revolution and division of wealth. He, along with other Marxists, including his future wife, Nadezhda Krupskaya, formed the Union of Struggle for the Emancipation of the Working Class. Due to his participation in this group, Lenin was arrested and exiled to Serbia in 1896. While in exile, he wrote several books regarding his developing philosophy of Leninism. He returned during the 1905 revolution, but did not gather much support for his party. Over the next few years, Lenin went abroad, where he formed the Bolshevik Party. In 1914, Germany invaded Russia, causing Russia's entrance to World War I, and in fall of 1915, Tsar Nicholas II took command of the Russian army. The Tsar was losing respect from his military, and Russian citizens rallied against his poor leadership. By March of 1917, discontent due to harsh working and living conditions in Russia brought forth mass protests. The Tsar was abdicated, and a weak provisional government stepped in under Alexander Kerensky. Kerensky had plans for a democratic Republican nation, but the politicians in his party had different opinions of what to prioritize in their new government. Some members were intent on leaving World War I and focusing on economic reforms, while conflicting viewpoints, including Kerensky, wanted to finish the war before moving forward. At this time of disorganization in the Russian government, Lenin began spreading propaganda against the provisional government, with his slogan, "All power to the Soviets." His ideas included workers' control, land reform, and peace with Germany, and they spread quickly. Soon, the number of Bolsheviks following Lenin threatened Kerensky's power. Kerensky sought a council to help him maintain authority, but the opinions of members of his own party differed too greatly to accomplish anything. To complicate matters further, Lavur Kornilov led a capitalist protest against the provisional government. There were now three parties fighting for control. By October of 1917, Leon Trotsky, a colleague of Lenin, joined the Bolsheviks, and on November 6, the Bolsheviks acted, using their military strength to force Kerensky out of office. Looking back at the event, Nadezhda Krupskaya wrote, "The October Revolution, by placing dictatorship into the hands of the proletariat, radically changed all the conditions of the struggle." But only because Lenin was guided not by the letter of the teachings of Marx and Engels, but by the revolutionary essence, because he knew how to apply Marxism also to the building up of socialism in the epic proletarian dictatorship. Lenin then called upon all political parties to form the Congress of Soviets, but when the Congress met in the capital, only Bolsheviks were present. Lenin then proceeded with the first steps toward communism, confiscating private land ownership and making employment mandatory for all citizens. Eager to leave World War I, Lenin spoke with the German leader, Kaiser Wilhelm II, to negotiate a treaty. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was signed on March 3, 1918, taking Ukraine, Finland, and Polish and Baltic provinces from Russia. Many Russians opposed the loss of territory and band together in a civil war against the Bolsheviks, now referred to as communists. Lenin forbade opposing socialists to take part in any political action, which inspired an assassination attempt in which Lenin was shot and wounded. Lenin then enforced the Red Terror, a system designed to horrify opposition by shooting Russian citizens and empowering the secret police to arrest, try, and execute. It was then that Lenin executed the royal family to eliminate the chance of the Tsar regaining power. Opposition to Lenin mounted, and several groups in the countryside surrounding Moscow sought to bring down the communists individually. These groups included social revolutionaries, Mensheviks, Tsarists, former military officers, and former landlords. Each small army had slightly separate motives, and they did not unite, but were collectively referred to as the Whites. Trotsky was put in control of the Bolshevik Red Army, whose base was in Moscow. Because of strong communist ideology, Moscow's army evolved into a powerful fighting force which defeated the disorganized Whites in 1920. Communist propaganda was now unopposed, and Lenin spread his ideas throughout Russia. He continued his study of Marx, now not only learning Marx's philosophy, but also Marx himself and the experiences which may have led him to the formulation of the Communist Manifesto. Lenin stated, "To know the subject thoroughly, one must take hold of and study all its sides, all the connections, and its proper place in the given situation." Some citizens were not as captivated, and in 1921, mutiny broke out in the city Kronstadt as sailors demanded political freedom. Lenin sent forces to crush the uprising. To satisfy economic discontent, Lenin did make some concessions, allowing for land ownership and private enterprise. He then looked to expand Russia's borders in order to create a buffer zone between communism and the capitalist West, forcing communism on previously sovereign countries. In 1922, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan were united as the Soviet Union at the signing of the Treaty of the Creation of the United Soviet Socialist Republic, USSR, and the Declaration of the Creation of the USSR. In 1924, at Lenin's death, Joseph Stalin took power as the first secretary of the USSR. He used his influence to bring all political and economic power to himself, transforming the USSR into a totalitarian state. Nadezhda Krupskaya later recalled, "Lenin's way of studying Marx in all the phases of revolutionary struggle, from beginning to end, will help us to understand better and go deeper not only into Marx, but into Lenin himself, into his method of studying Marx, and the method of converting Marx's teachings into a guide to action." Lenin appeared a strong believer of communism to the Russian people. However, he was willing to use force and didn't always have the people's interests in mind, believing he held the solution to their struggles. Harvard professor Richard Pipes wrote, "Even more problematic were statements by Lenin that were not intended for publication. They often contradicted his public pronouncements and clashed with his official image as an idealist who resorted to deception and violence only out of necessity." By many accounts, Lenin began his political ambitions as a true Marxist. His writings closely followed those of Marx. As events unfolded during the time of his leadership, however, his actions veered away from both his and Marx's writings. Unlike Marx, he came to believe that the proletariat of Russia needed a professional revolutionary to lead them to true utopian communism. When opposition to his ideas arose, Lenin responded with terror and oppression. He said, "It is true that liberty is precious, so precious that it must be carefully rationed." Lenin was not transparent to the people of Russia, often changing his opinions in private. By his death, some believe Lenin's priorities may have been centered more on expansion and power than on creating a communist state true to Marxist ideals.